Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy and welcome to this tutorial on CSS borders. Now in this tutorial we're going to take a look at creating a div element. So we're going to create just an empty element, not going to put anything inside it, and then we're going to start styling up the borders on the outside of this element. And I'm going to briefly at the end of the tutorial talk about the box model and how this increases the size of a particular element if you give it, a border. Essentially, if you were to say have a piece of paper and then give it a border on the inside, you would increase the size of the paper, but CSS works slightly differently. So let's go ahead and take a look at actually, styling up something with some borders, and we'll talk about the shorthand property, the long properties, blah blah blah. So let's go ahead and create an element in the middle here. You can see at the moment I've just got a document laid out here with a link to my style sheet, which is called primary.css. I've just linked that through so I can start to create styles within there. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the div. So I'm going to give this div an ID of container. Let's just create the div first. The ID is going to be container, and that's what we're just going to be using to style it up. Not going to put anything inside, so I'll leave all this on one line. Go ahead and refresh our page in the browser. You can see I can see it here in the element inspector. I'm just inspecting element in Chrome. You can do this in Firefox with Firebug. We've got an empty div with no styling at the moment. So in primary.css, let's go ahead and select this container. And inside of here, what do we do? Well, we first of all want to give it a width, a height, and then I'm going to give it a background as well, just so we can see what we're working with. So let's go ahead and set the background color. I'm going to set this to 999, just so it's a sort of light grey color, and I'm going to give it a height of 300, and I'm going to give it a width of 300 too, just so we've got a nice space to see that we're working with. Refresh. Okay, so we've got a space here. That actually might be a bit too dark, so let's go ahead and use EEE instead. You can just about see that. If not, then it doesn't really matter because the border will show up anyway. Okay, so the border property. The first thing I'm going to be looking at is the shorthand property, because it's the property that you'll most likely use. It's unlikely that you want to set the top border different to the bottom border or the left to the right. So we'll look at the shorthand first because that's probably the most relevant, and then we'll look at the individual property types themselves. So let's go down here on a new line, and the property name is border. So we just type border, and then we specify three things. The first one is the width of the border, or the size of the border. Now in most cases this will be 1 pixel, but could be 2, 3, 4, however many you need. Usually if you just want to sort of border something, it's neater to just do a 1 pixel, like a hairline border if you like. So the first that we want to feed this through is 1px, so the size. Then we want to choose the type. Now usually again this will be solid. This is probably the most common type, but solid will just mean it has a solid finish to it. It doesn't have any gaps in between. It's not ridged or anything like that. So we have solid. Then we choose the color. Again, this can be something like green. It can be an RGB color. It can be an RGBA value. It can be a hex value, most commonly. So if I was to set this with a border of 1px solid black, so we're saying a 1 pixel border, it's solid and it's black. When we refresh, you can see that that's just given it a black outline. Relatively straightforward. We could go ahead and change the color of this to green, for example, so we could just pop green in there, and when we refresh we're left with a green border. Okay, so we've done that. Let's take a look at just some of the other property types. I'll go ahead and set this back to black. So we've got things like dashed in here, which give a gapped effect. So we've got small gaps in between, and you can see that quite nicely. The corners of here are not left out, so we've always got something in the corner of the border just there. It will just sort of space everything out for you. We've also got dotted as well, which is just dots instead of dashes. Relatively straightforward. This looks quite nice because it looks quite application like. So if you're creating something where you've got something that maybe you hover over and you get this nice border in, that would look nice. Things like selections and stuff like that. And then we've got a few other silly property types like inset, for example. I don't know if you'll be able to notice it too well here, but if we go ahead and set this to say 10 pixels and refresh, oh no. Let's just go ahead and change, because I've got it as black at the moment. If for example I was to choose a red color, you can see the inset then sort of takes its place. If you look carefully, this one here is a bit lighter here, and this one here is a bit darker. So if you're using black, then obviously it won't take effect. But really, it's a silly property that shouldn't really be used. It doesn't look very nice. It's probably better to keep things solid, as small as possible. But again, that depends on what effect you're going for. Who am I to say that you can't use an inset border? But there's plenty more, well, a couple more border types, but really they're unnecessary. You're usually going to just specify the size, quite a small border, solid black anyway. So what else are we going to look at? Well, like I said before, we're looking at the border, the shorthand border property. Well, obviously you can do things like border top, for example. So you could set a specific border on the top. I'm just overall border and just setting the top border, all of the borders, sorry, to something. But for example, if I was to set them to, as 1 pixel solid and black, so we've got this effect here right now. If I was to then go ahead and say, well, actually, I want to go ahead and set the top border to green. So what I'd do is I'd say border top color, and I'd say green. Okay, so instead of setting, let's say, border top width to 1 pixel, border, and I'll bring this down here. This is an alternative, by the way, so I'm giving you sort of an alternative way to do this. We could say border top width 1 pixel, border top style solid, border top color black, or hash not. Now you could go ahead and do this, paste that down for each side, and you could say border bottom width, border bottom, and then for so on and so forth. I'm not going to do them all, but this could be left and then right. But obviously that's silly. It's causing you to create too much unnecessary code. So what you would do is, let's say you give it an overall border, which you'd most likely do. You could then go ahead and specify individual properties after that, and because we're cascading down, we set this property first, then this overrides this, and not all of it, it will just override what you specify. So now we'll see that we've got a 1 pixel border around the whole thing, we've got a solid border around the whole thing, all of the sides are black, but then we override just the top color, the top border color, to green. So when I go ahead and refresh now, you can see that we've got black side here, black side here, black side here, but just the color of the top has changed. So as we cascade down this list, we can make small amendments more specifically. So it's obviously always recommended to use the shorthand property. It makes sense, otherwise you're duplicating and causing a lot of unnecessary code. So I could then go border bottom width to 5 pixels. So when I do this and I refresh, let's go into our browser, you can see that the border at the bottom now is obviously wider than the rest because we've cascaded down and set that separately. So that's the shorthand property here, which you're most likely going to use, and then as we cascade down you can make individual changes. Now, as I said before, let's reset this back to where we were. So we've got 1 pixel border around the whole thing. I refresh. Now if I go ahead and inspect this in Chrome, you'll notice that we've actually got a container that's 302 pixels. If you just look underneath the div element there, you've got a container with 302 pixels by 302. Now that's odd because we've set it to 300 by 300. Surely, if we're going to be entirely precise about how we do this, surely we don't want this to expand more. Well, actually what we've done is, we're now sort of looking at the box model and how we've created our 300 by 300 element, but the borders on the left and the right have added 2 more pixels to the entire width, and the borders on the top and the bottom have added 2 more pixels to the entire height of this container. So really what we've done now is we've expanded the container, and these 2 values can't really be relied on. For example, if we were going, I'm sort of you know, making this a bit not about borders, but still, we've got a padding of say 1 pixel. What that will then do is it will create a 304 by 304 pixel, because it'll add a padding to each side. Anyway, to do with borders, just a quick note, I'm not going to go into this too much, but you need to be careful with this. If you're being really precise with measurements, when you add a border to this, it's going to expand the width of the entire div itself. So what you can do to combat that is you can go ahead and you can set these to slightly lower values. Pull up your computer's calculator, or pull up a calculator, in a physical calculator, and actually subtract the borders, the padding, anything off. So in this case it would be 299 by 299 pixels, and then what we get is when we refresh and you inspect it, 298, because we've got two borders each side. We've got a border of 1 pixel each side. So when you refresh that, we have a 300 by 300 pixel container with a border still. So we're sort of taking away from this to to accommodate for the border. Anyway, that's a bit too much about the box model for this tutorial, but that's how to do borders in CSS. Play around with them, play around with widths, colors, styles, anything, but this is just a basic introduction.